Please come and win that plushie for me. She grabbed his arm firmly and turned around without glancing at his face. Taehyung, who had been mid-conversation on the phone, felt a sudden pull on his arm. His body tensed and he almost snapped at whoever dared to interrupt him, but the softness of the touch stopped him. He turned his head slightly to see Wine eagerly dragging him along. She barely glanced up, fully convinced she had her brother in tow. You have to win this for me. It is too cute to resist. Taehyung blinked in surprise, the phone call completely forgotten, as he allowed himself to be pulled along by her. Her bright enthusiasm stirred something in him, and the way she was unknowingly clinging to him sent a strange warmth through his chest. They reached the booth and Wine eagerly paid the worker. All right, show me what you... She turned to him with a smile but stopped as the realization sank in. Blood drained from her face while the smile instantly faded. Taehyung chuckled quietly to himself, shaking his head and stepping forward, picking up the dart. With the flick of his wrist, he threw the dart. It struck the target dead center, and the worker handed Wine the plushie she had been eyeing, but she was too stunned to hold it. Taehyung held it from the worker and moved to her, but Wine stepped backward, her face flushed with embarrassment. I'm sorry, I mistook you for my brother. Your outfits are the same, as well as height, she said in a low tone, awkwardly tucking the hairstrand behind her ear. Wine, where were you? I have been looking for you. She heard Brad's voice from behind and rushed to him. Taehyung stood holding the plushie and staring at her retreating figure. He snapped out of his reverie, hearing his PA's voice. Sir, Miss Wine is discharged to home. He nodded, staring at the plushie, and picked up his phone. You can leave. Sky walked out and closed the door behind him. Taehyung dialed Wine's number, but the call went unanswered. Meanwhile, Wine was lying on the bed when Brad entered. Wine, Edgar is here to see you, he said softly. She looked at him and said, I was in the hospital since yesterday, but he came today, she said with serious expression. Brad sat beside her, gently caressing the gauze around her forehead. I know he might have been busy. Wine nodded with indifference. I'll send him in, he said and walked out. After a few moments, the door burst open and Edgar barged in. What the hell is going on, Wine? Why did 𝐂𝐴𝐧 send you to the hospital? His eyes were burning with fury. Wine looked at him with disbelief. Answer me, do you know him? He grabbed her arm and shook her. Edgar, have you gone crazy? He happened to be passing by when I fell from the stairs. My head was heavily bleeding. I lost consciousness and no one else was there, so he sent me to the hospital. It's not a big deal. She glared at him, getting her arm free from his grasp. How could be such a coincidence? Were you dying? Couldn't you wait for me or call me? Enough, Edgar. 𝐂𝐴𝐧 is one of the largest fund donors of our university. It is normal for him to come there. I didn't think you were such a narrow-minded person. I have got 5 stitches. You came now, that too, to question me, and you expect an unconscious person to call you, she said with a chuckle. Edgar bit his lips, realizing he had messed up. He parted his lips to speak, but Wine's phone rang. Her heart sank seeing the caller ID. She swiftly declined the call. I'm sorry, Wine, Her phone rang again. She switched off with trembling hands, seeing Taehyung's caller ID again. Answer it. She shook her head. Not that important, she mumbled. Edgar sat beside her and reached out his hand to touch her face, but Wine moved back. I'm sorry, Wine. I didn't mean to hurt you. It's just that Taehyung is one of my biggest enemies. I don't want him to use you against me. He's a dangerous man. You have no idea how low he can stoop. He held her hands gently and spoke. Wine looked at him hesitantly. Please don't be mad at me. I'll make it up to you. I want to sleep. Please leave me alone, she said, lost in a deep thought. Edgar kissed her knuckles and stood. All right, have some rest. I'll come to meet you tomorrow. I love you, he said with a smile and walked out. Wine let out a sigh and leaned against the headboard. How do I tell Edgar that 𝐂𝐴𝐧 has been calling me for a month now? He's surely gonna misunderstand it. This is his trust. How can he claim to love me when he doesn't even trust me? She mumbled and closed her eyes, leaning against the headboard. She dozed off for a long time until she felt a soft touch on her face. Her eyes widened. She was about to scream, but Taehyung swiftly placed his hand on her mouth. We don't want anyone to know, do we? He whispered, staring at her gauze. I'm taking off my hand, be quiet. Why not vigorously? Tae moved his hand and touched her forehead softly. How did you get in? She scooted back and asked with horrified expression. From the window. Leave that, tell me, does it hurt? And why didn't you answer my call? I was so worried. He said as if they have known each other since childhood. Stay away from me, go out from my room, I don't even know you. My bad, I mistook you for my brother, and I have apologized for you. How do you want me to pay for this small mistake? She was on the verge of crying. He held her wrist and pulled her close to him. I just want you. I don't know. What should I name these feelings? All I know is that I want to spend my life with you, he said in a low tone, staring into her eyes. One gulped. Leave my hand. I can't be with you. I'm engaged. Taehyung's eyes widened. What? Yes, I'm engaged and soon I'll get married. Please stop pestering me. You won't get anything. She released her hand from his. He stared at her coldly and stood. Next time, please don't come to my room. We'll talk about it once you get well. Take care, he said and walked out. One stared at his retreating figure. Edgar was right. He's dangerous. How can he sneak into my room at this hour? She mumbled and swiftly stood to lock the window. Time skipped. Taehyung didn't stop calling Wine or sneaking into her bedroom. Wine was growing anxious with the passing days, as she couldn't even tell anyone about him. I wanted to consider her engagement with Edgar once more. Edgar tried to talk to her, to coax her, but she wasn't willing to see him. Today, after many days, Wine came to the university, and now she was called to the dean's office. She knocked on the door but didn't get any response. After thinking for a while, she entered. A familiar cologne hit her nostrils, making her steps halt. What took you so long? She flinched, hearing his voice from behind, and turned around. Mr. Kim, what are you doing here? Where is the dean? Her voice trembled. Taehyung took a step towards her while Wine took 3 steps backward. Sit here, we need to talk. He pointed at the couch. She clutched the hem of her shirt. What's it? Just speak up. Taehyung let out a sigh. Why don't you agree with me at once? He said and grabbed her wrist, dragging her to the couch. Sit quietly. He sat her and took a seat beside her. Where is Dean? She asked, looking around anxiously. Relaxed. First of all, tell me, how is your wound? He gently touched her forehead. She stared at his face, her heart skipped a beat. I'm fine, she mumbled, pushing away his hand, then sighed and remained silent. One subconsciously compared Edgar and Taehyung. Both of them were different from each other in every aspect. Taehyung cared for her so much while Edgar cared about his reputation. Taehyung's voice snapped her back to reality. You still remember who pushed you down the stairs? She glanced at his serious face and shook her head lightly. I don't know who it was. Alright, I'll find him in my own way. He shrugged his shoulders and leaned on the couch. You don't have to meddle in my business. If I want, I can tell my fiancé to look after this matter. He grabbed her arm and pulled her, causing her to bump into his hard chest. Don't ever mention your fiancé in front of me. He grabbed her jaw and said through gritted teeth. Wine trembled, seeing his dark gaze. Why not? I'm telling you once again, let me go. We both belong to different worlds. I don't care. All I know is I want you. By hook or by crook, you're mine. She chuckled, shaking her head. Dream on, I'll never be yours. He tightened his grip on her waist. That bastard Edgar is your fiancé, right? Do you love him so much? He growled, pulling her even closer. Wine's body went numb at his proximity, but she tried hard to get out of his embrace. Yes, he's my fiancé and I love him so much. She was hitting him on the chest and shoulders. He pressed her against the couch and leaned toward her lips. Her eyes widened and her heart sank, feeling his lips on hers. She tried pushing him, but he pinned her hands above her head. Tears streamed down her face and she struggled in his strong grip, but in vain. Her tears damped his face, snapping him to his senses. He swiftly released her and moved back. He found it hard to speak. Wine stood in front of him, wiping her face and slapped him across the face. What do you think of yourself? Do you own me? She growled, fury burning her eyes. Edgar is right. You are the most disgusting and despicable person, she said through gritted teeth. He pressed his lips in a hard line and took a step toward her, but Wine raised her hand and shook her head. Stay away from me. Her body visibly trembled. He ran his fingers through his hair. I'm sorry, I just lost my temper. He mumbled. Wine walked to the door when his words stopped her. I'll show you the true colors of Edgar and then decide who is worse. We don't know him yet. She snorted and walked out, slamming the door behind her. Taehyung slumped on the couch while the dean entered after a few moments. Mr. Kim, did you find who pitched Miss Wine? Taehyung shook his head and stood. Leave this matter, he mumbled with aloofness and walked out. Taehyung arrived at a hotel for a meeting. He was passing by a room when he heard a familiar voice. Where is she? Why hasn't she arrived yet? Taehyung clenched his jaw, hearing his impatient voice. Wait for a while, she'll be here in no time. But Edgar, don't you think you're doing wrong to whine? Will you keep these girls after marriage? Edgar laughed. Taehyung was on the verge of losing his temper and barging in. If wine doesn't fulfill my desires, I must keep them. What she doesn't give me, I get it from these beauties. And she'll never know. I love her truly. What kind of love is this? Taehyung walked away, fuming in anger. I'll expose you. Don't worry, bastard. Because of you, I lost my temper and hurt her. He mumbled and saw his PA Sky waiting for him. Sir, I have prepared everything for the meeting. The dealers are waiting for you. Taehyung nodded absent-mindedly. 2 weeks later, Taehyung didn't show up in front of Wine again. He sent her tons of messages, but Wine didn't bother to reply. She had been thinking of calling off the engagement with Edgar. She visited his house as he was not attending her calls, but his mom informed her that he hadn't returned home for a few days. The Wine opened her eyes, her head throbbing in pain. She gasped, seeing the unfamiliar living room. Ma'am, you're awake? Wine turned to the maid, trying hard to remember what had happened when she was on her way to the university. Where am I? How did I come here? She stood and asked anxiously. Calm down, ma'am. Sir will be here in a few minutes. Please have a seat. The maid sat her while Wine's mind was stuck on the words, sir. Who could possibly kidnap her in broad daylight? Taehyung's deep voice broke the chains of her thoughts. I'm sorry I had to bring you here this way, he said in a cold tone. Wine stood, her face pale at the sight of him. What do you want from me? He sat on the couch across from her with his legs wide open. Nothing, just sit quietly. His dark gaze made her shudder. She feared him, and that didn't go unnoticed by Taehyung. Please let me go. Do you want to take revenge for the slap? Taehyung cut her off and sat straight. Wipe away these tears. I wouldn't have apologized if I wanted revenge. I just want to show you something. Let Edgar come here. His heart ached seeing her scared of him. Do you want to use me against Edgar? He's not that bad. She mumbled. Taehyung chuckled darkly. I hope what you said is true. Let's see if he can take you away from here. She sniffed. He'll get me out of here. Taehyung just nodded at her determined tone. After a few minutes, Sky came in, followed by Edgar. Wine? She stood and walked to his side. Taehyung shot daggers at Edgar. What is it, Mr. Kim? Why did you bring my fiancé here? Taehyung chuckled and pointed to the couch. Have a seat first. Wine held Edgar's arm and shook her head. He patted her hand. Just say it. Taehyung nodded, leaning forward, placing his elbows on his knees. I have got your radio recordings. You're scheming against Mr. Raiden. Because of Mr. Raiden's back, you dare to stand against me, he said with a smirk and leaned back on the couch. Edgar's expression changed. He gulped, wiping the sweat from his forehead. Why would I believe you? Indeed. Sky, please bring it. Sky nodded and walked away. Edgar, you just have stepped into the mafia world while I'm born in it. Don't try to play dirty with me because I'll disappear you from here and no one will know it. You have tried to frame me several times. This time I won't spare you. He spoke darkly. Wine's hold on Edgar's arm tightened. He was trying hard to hide behind him. Taehyung averted his gaze from them. Sky came with the files and audio recorder. He threw them in front of Edgar. These are all the information about the deals you made. Just imagine, what would Mr. Raiden do when he sees them? Edgar's face went pale seeing the video recording that Sky played. What do you want? Taehyung chuckled. What can you give me? He asked with a raised brow. Edgar closed him inwardly and let out a sigh. Anything you ask, as long as you don't show this evidence to Mr. Raiden. Taehyung nodded thoughtfully, staring at Wine by his side. I want your fiancé for a night. Wine's legs went numb. Edgar pursed his lips. Wine looked at him hopefully. Edgar, let's go from here. She shook his arm and said on the verge of crying, what if you betray me? Taehyung shook his head, his eyes red from rage. I don't go back on my words. Edgar thought for a while and nodded. Fine, you can have wine for tonight. Wan gasped and stepped backward, staring at him in disbelief. Taehyung clenched his chest, shooting daggers at Edgar through his eyes. Are you sure? He nodded. Wan shook her head, tears flowing down her eyes. Edgar, she muttered through gritted teeth. He reached out his hand to touch her face, but she slapped it away. I never thought you could be such a disgusting person. She grabbed his collar. Taehyung stood and walked over to them. When I'll pick you up tomorrow morning. She slapped him across the face. Go to hell. She pushed him, weeping, and moved away. You may leave. Taehyung gestured for Sky to escort him out. Edgar walked out while Taehyung turned to Wine. Please let me go, she begged, sitting at his feet. Taehyung bent to her level, holding her shoulders. Stand up. She stood with a lowered head. I just wanted to show you what kind of a person Edgar is. Don't ruin your life with someone unworthy of you. He wiped her face gently. I'm sorry I can't keep my hands to myself when you are around. He mumbled till he several steps backward. Sky will drop you to your house, he said, and walked away, leaving her in a daze. Time skip. It's been 3 to 4 months since then. Wine told Edgar to call off the engagement. He pleaded with her to give him a chance, but Wine ignored his pleadings. In the end, Wine called it off, but didn't say anything about Taehyung to her family. She hadn't met Taehyung since then, nor did he approach her. Her heart had been torn between gratitude and the strange pull she felt towards him. Now Wine entered the banquet hall with her family. As her family greeted other guests, Wine caught the sight of Taehyung across the room, and her heart skipped a beat. He was standing with his parents, his tall figure cutting an imposing figure in his tailored suit. His eyes, however, it softened the moment they landed on her. For a second he froze, his gaze lingering longer than it should have before he turned to his parents, who were already making their way towards Wine's family. They exchanged greetings. Mr. Kim, this is Wine, my daughter, and Wine, this is Mr. Kim and his wife. They are our business partner. Wine's father introduced her to them. She smiled at them, politely and greeted them. Taehyung and Brad were caught in a conversation. Mr. Kim and Mr. Hong went to meet their business colleagues, while Mrs. Kim and Mrs. Hong were immersed in a conversation. Wine's gaze landed on Taehyung, while in the meantime Taehyung also looked at her. Wine meet Taehyung. Brad introduced them, both of them passed faint smiles. There was a tension between them, thick and charged, but no one else seemed to notice. The formalities continued, but Wine could feel Taehyung's eyes on her as if he couldn't tear his gaze away. Later, as she was standing near the edge of the dance floor sipping her drink, she felt a presence beside her. She glanced up to see Taehyung. Would you care to dance? His voice was low and smooth. Wine reluctantly looked at him. He smiled and stepped back. It's all right, I just wanted to ask. Wine hesitated for a brief moment, then nodded. Sure. He offered his hand and she took it, feeling the warmth of his touch sent a subtle shiver through her. He guided her to the dance floor, his figure firm but gentle. Taehyung's hand found its place on her waist, the other still holding hers as they began to sway in time with the rhythm. Wine felt the heat of his body radiating against her, and for a moment the world around them seemed to vanish. His grip on her waist tightened ever so slightly as he pulled her closer, and she could feel the firmness of his chest pressed against hers. Her breath hissed and she glanced up at him through her lashes. I'm sorry for the other day, he mumbled against her ear after a while. She looked at him, her heart skipping a beat. It's in the past now. I am grateful to you for letting me go that day. He smiled, shaking his head. I never intended on doing anything. I wouldn't have let you go if the situation was different. He brushed his knuckles over her face. Wine blinked, her pulse quickening as she looked into his eyes. Before she could respond, the song ended and the moment between them broke. She stepped back, offering him a small, understanding smile before excusing herself for some fresh air. The air on the balcony was cool and refreshing, and Wine closed her eyes, letting the night breeze calm her racing heart. She stood there feeling relaxed. After a few good minutes passed, she heard Taehyung's deep voice from behind. Do you always disappear after a dance? Wine turned to find Taehyung leaning against the doorway, his eyes locked on her. I needed some air, she said softly. I noticed. His lips quaked into a faint smile as he stepped closer to her. I didn't know your parents held this banquet, she said in a low tone. He hummed in response. Why, I need to show you something. She raised her brows. What is it? Would you come to my bedroom? She blinked, staring at him with confusion. You can bring pride with you. She bit her lips. Should I go and tell him? It's okay, I can go. He smiled. Follow me. He said, simply offering his hand again. She hesitated but found herself reaching for it. His warmth grounded her as he led her through the halls of the grand estate. They stopped in front of a door and Taehyung opened it, revealing his bedroom. Val looked around, her nose on edge. But when her eyes fell on the bed, she noticed the familiar sight of plushie sitting on top of the pillows. This plushie? She said with surprise, remembering the arcade in mall. Taehyung walked over to the bed, picked it up and turned back to her. I never forget that day. I had been waiting for the right moment to give this to you. He admitted quietly, his gaze softening as he held the plushie out to her. Why now? He stepped closer, his eyes searching hers. I want to cherish you. I want to take care of you, if you let me, because I have been thinking about you every day since then. He murmured softly, his voice like a caress. Wine's breath caught in her throat, the intensity of his words sending her mind into a whirlwind. She looked up at him, her heart pounding as he reached out, gently tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. She swallowed hard, her eyes locking with his. I would like that. A soft smile spread across Taehyung's lips and he stepped closer, his hand coming to rest on her waist as he pulled her into a gentle embrace. Then let me start now, he whispered, his lips brushing against her forehead in a tender kiss. Thank you. She nestled the plushie close and said with a smile, I just want you to respect me. She touched his face, then held her hand and kissed her palm. I promise I'll never disappoint you. I'm trying to change myself for you. I went back on my words and teached a lesson to Edgar. She smiled. He leaned and gently kissed her lips.